Good evening, Deputy Prime Minister Heng Keat, Mr. George Yeo, esteemed guests, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Nicole, and I'm honored to be your host for the launch of the third series of George Yeo Musings. On behalf of World Scientific Publishing, I would like to extend a very warm welcome to all of you, and thank you for taking the time to join us today. To start off today's events, I would like to invite our guest of honor, Deputy Prime Minister Heng Keat, on stage. DPM Heng, please.
George and Jennifer Yeo, Taiho, Doreen, and friends, and Grandma. So delighted to see you. Now, Winnie and I are very happy to join all of you here this evening. In the foreword to Musings Series 3, George writes, "Sometimes I feel like a piece of flotsam swept along by the tide of big and small history. All of us are flotsam on the same great river of life. Along our voyage down the river, we encounter other pieces of flotsam who become companions and fellow travelers." Now, when George invited me to speak at today's launch, I was honored. But he didn't tell me why I was invited, but I got a clue when I saw the foreword. Could it be because I'm a fellow piece of flotsam? And we have indeed shared some adventures. We were fellow travelers in the early 2000s when George was Minister for Trade and Industry, and I was a Deputy Secretary and then Permanent Secretary. I realized perhaps I was invited here to share my voyage with George during our 4 years together in MTI and our subsequent journeys that brought us together from time to time. And no doubt, all of you here are also fellow travelers with George and have interesting stories to tell. Years before we floated together, George was floating ahead of me in university. We were in the same college in the UK, but George was several years ahead of me. An interesting story that I heard later was that the light in George's room was on till the early hours of the morning. This fellow traveler thought that George, an engineering student, was burning midnight oil over his studies. George was a brilliant student and was curious why he had to work so hard. I solved the mystery years later when we were working together in MTI. Traveling together with him to engage many leaders in the region and beyond, I found that he had a remarkable knowledge of the history of each place we visited and engaged his host deeply on many issues, past and present. At one of our dinner conversations, I found out that though George was an engineering student, the lights in his room were on till morning because George was so absorbed in reading the history of various civilizations and reflecting on the forces shaping the fate of people throughout the ages. In fact, his interests range widely, as you can see from this book's eclectic musings on anything from geopolitics to genetic science to Tai Chi Gong and the construction of a concert hall. I think of George as a Renaissance man in the breadth of his interests and depth of understanding of a wide range of subjects. George has translated his deep interest in arts and culture into important legacies for Singapore. During his time at MITA, the then Ministry for Information and the Arts, this lovely concert hall where we are now, together with Tor Theatre, Old Parliament House, and Empress Place, were gazetted as national monuments, and then later on refurbished. Together, they now form an important cultural complex. George also undertook a bold initiative to create a brand new cultural complex, what Singaporeans lovingly dub as the Durian, the Esplanade Concert Hall and Esplanade Theatre. I do not know if the architecture of the new cultural complex holds any special meaning behind it, but I think it's fitting that cultural endeavors prompt us to reflect and appreciate, and that we get to the succulent fruits only if we are prepared to overcome our fear of the spiky exterior. Besides hardware, George also updated our software through his relaxation of censorship and support for many creative groups to shape a distinctive Singapore voice, drawing on the diverse elements of our multicultural society. Thanks to this reshaping of our arts and culture landscape, we now enjoy a range of performance art spaces and a dynamic arts and culture scene. Besides bringing joy to audiences, I find it so heartening to see many young Singaporeans excelling on the global stage in the various performing arts. Some of these stories are shared in several chapters of Musings 3. Another important way that George translated his deep interest and knowledge of history and global affairs into a legacy for Singapore is a network of free trade agreements and economic partnerships that he initiated. It is, to me, a fascinating story of policy entrepreneurship at its finest, and I'm privileged to witness and be involved in it. By the turn of the millennium, support for free trade and globalization was winning. For Singapore, this was a serious concern as we thrive on free trade. When George was selected by fellow ministers to chair Agriculture Working Group at the Seattle Ministerial Conference in 1999, George agreed, knowing full well that agriculture was a politically sensitive topic for many countries. The meetings were tough and went around the clock, amidst a backdrop of protests against globalization and sharply divergent interests of countries where farmers were a major political force. George was astute and persistent in finding common ground amid this diversity of interests, and he shares those details in this book. Ultimately, though no new round was launched at Seattle, George did succeed in negotiating a draft text that all parties could agree on. I joined MTI in 2000 and joined George for the next WTO Ministerial Conference in Doha, Qatar, in November 2001. Coming after the failure in Seattle and protests against free trade, and shortly after 9/11, it was very tense, with warships patrolling the waters. The disagreements on agriculture continued. George nevertheless played a key role in forging agreements on agriculture and played a key role in other parts of the negotiations, including on issues like pharmaceuticals. At the meeting, against great odds, the Doha round was launched. At that meeting, China was admitted as a 143rd WTO member. It was a major turning point in the global economy. Georgia's ability to find common grounds amidst diverse interests to seek a way forward was, in my view, a critical reason how he managed to play such a key role on the global stage. But even after the launch of the Doha round, progress was painfully slow. George realized very early on that left on his own, the momentum for free trade would continue to stall, with grave implications for Singapore. With a very creative mind, he initiated our first free trade agreement, or FTA, with another small but like-minded economy, New Zealand. For the next few years, I remember traveling around the world with George to persuade other economies to embark on FTAs with us. Some of our counterparts in ASEAN were unhappy that it looked like Singapore was breaking ranks. I remember as permanent secretary having to respond to articles in the media on our stance. Later, when the ASEAN ministers agreed to launch the ASEAN Economic Community, I was in the trenches with fellow secretaries to hammer out the agreement. It was heartening for me to see my fellow secretaries embracing the idea so wholeheartedly. One agreement followed another as the momentum took off. It was a whole of government effort, with officials in MFA, MTI, and various ministries all pitching in. Today, we have a network of 27 free trade agreements, bilateral and regional. In a more contested world, these FTAs are valuable assets for Singapore. So it is interesting to read in the opening pages of this latest series, New Zealand Chief Negotiator Tim Grosser calling the Singapore-New Zealand FTA the first building block of the Trans-Pacific Partnership. In fact, I recall when the FTA was launched, we also had many snide remarks from various people as to what could two small little economies do for world trade. So indeed, a small acorn that George planted has grown into a big oak tree. I've spent some time recounting this as I believe what George has achieved with the FTAs is closely related to a core question that was always on the mind of our founding Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew. This year marks the 100th anniversary of Mr. Lee's birth. In his latest Musings, George recounted in 2 chapters working with Lee Kuan Yew and Singapore. Mr. Lee's core question was, how does a tiny state with no resources of any kind survive and prosper? Mr. Lee's answer, strive to make Singapore useful and relevant to the world, notwithstanding our size. What George did as minister in MTI shows how a minister with a lively and creative mind can keep Singapore relevant and useful to the world. At Doha, he was able to forge agreements among many competing and divergent interests. Later, when we embarked on persuading countries to have FTAs with us, I saw how his deep knowledge of the history, politics, and culture of each place he visited enabled him to engage and connect with his host in a deep and meaningful way. It was a business of trade, but his interest went beyond trade. People were always very charmed by his respect for their history and cultures. I believe George holds a genuine respect and deep appreciation for, I would say, every culture and tribe. Indeed, you can see this in a whole collection of musings. Across the 3 series, we are treated to George's scholarship on countries and cultures around the world and hear his stories as he seeks to continually deepen his understanding. I can go on about the many other changes he initiated or supported while we were at MTI, including almost a complete renaming and reorientation of all the statutory boards under MTI, from the Trade Development Board to IE Singapore, which I was personally involved in, to the transformation of NSTB to A-Star and giving the space to Philip Yeo to revamp our entire science and technology strategy, to the reorganization of the Productivity and Standards Board to Spring. I recall Mr. Lee Kuan Yew wondering if this was all part of a dot-com madness. We had to assure him that it was genuine transformation. A Renaissance man and an innovator, a creative thinker and a problem solver. George seeks out knowledge, he thinks out of the box, he breaks barriers and breaks down silos. At the core of it all, what has he sought to do? To connect across historical and cultural divides, to build bridges that bring different interests and points of views together, and that lead to new possibilities. One of the ways to build bridges is through sharing his thoughts and experiences with others, as George is doing through these books. When George left MTI to join MFA, we prepared a farewell gift for him, a compilation of the speeches he had made while at MTI. Anyone who has worked with George can tell you that he is an extremely good speechwriter. Most of the time at MTI, he wrote his speeches himself, and very quickly, filling them with unexpected connections between different words and ideas and interesting anecdotes. When we passed him the bound copy of his speeches to George, we encouraged him to have his speeches published. I'm glad to see that this little gift that we presented to him has sort of served as a prototype for Musings. But sharing his musings is even better than sharing his speeches, as George is able to write as well about his family and his faith, 2 important pillars of his life. He writes with openness and earnestness about them in Series 2 of Musings. Here, let me share with you my admiration for the strength and devotion of key members of George's family, his wife Jennifer and his 4 children, Edwina, Edward, William, and Frederick. And it's so lovely to see Grandma here tonight. Jennifer and their 4 children have not only floated along the river of life together, they have gone through rapids. And Jennifer chooses to emerge from these challenges by showing gratitude and extending help to others through the Viva Foundation, which is their family's way of thanksgiving. It is a family story that's so inspiring So thank you, Jennifer, for your courage and sharing, including most recently in your interview with the Sunday Times. George writes about this shared river, and I quote, "Life is a journey which has meaning because we share it with others. From those ahead of us, we learn. To those behind us, we leave a trail." I couldn't agree more. And here I add my own words. With those beside us, we build bridges. I hope I've managed to put across today that above all, scholar, soldier, philosopher, negotiator, trailblazer, George is a bridge builder. That is what I've learned from him and what I admire and appreciate about him. In his many years of public service, George has made many valuable contributions, and I touched on just a fraction of this during our voyage together at MTI. The 3 volumes of Musings, with the latest edition, total more than 350,000 words. It's a generous sharing. They invite us to reflect on our life, our relationship to others, on the wonders and diversity around us, and on Singapore's past, present, and future. It is a generous and valuable contribution, which I'm sure will be of immense value to all readers, Singaporeans and those overseas. So George, congratulations on the launch of Musings Series 3 today. Hats off to you on the hard work you put in this collection of musings. I hope your books will indeed leave a trail and continue to build bridges. Congratulations. Thank you.
Thank you, DPM Heng. Next, I would like to invite the man himself, Mr. Yeo, on stage to say a few words. Mr. Yeo, please.
May I first apologize to those who were queuing up for my autograph and were told at the last moment that I had to go down to receive DPM and could no longer sign. May I apologize to those who had a signature but without your name being written in it. But I'll be doing other signing events, and I welcome you to contact World Scientific to send your book to my office, and I will sign them properly, and you can come and collect them from the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy. Apologies once again. Thank you for indulging me. I was so relieved when the 3rd book was done. I told the publisher, we need to celebrate. Let's have a party. And let's have a big hall. And let's have it in a very nice place. So in the end, we settled on the Victoria Concert Hall because, well, it's got nice corridors, it's at the mouth of the Singapore River, and we can drink and make merry after this. I want to thank many people for the journey of writing this book. It started when Un Tai Ho, after discussing with World Scientific, Chua Hong Kun, a way to get me to write. They knew I was busy, and they said, well, just interview him for a few sessions, and then we get a book. And when that proposal came to me, I thought that sounded easy enough. It was during COVID, and we had time. But after the first 2 Monday sessions, I was not happy with the transcript because it was too loose. And I started, before every session, to write what I was going to say, and often, with Tai Ho's permission, inserted the questions to myself. I spent maybe 12 to 15 hours every week writing before we met on Monday for 2-3 hours, after which we would often tapao our food and go to Taiho's apartment for lunch. Because of COVID, we could meet without interruption 6 months. Then Hong Kong from World Scientific said, "No, the chapters are too long. Can they be broken up?" It's like saying you've got a sculpture, can you break it up into 2? It's too big. That was an enormous effort to break up 25 chapters into some 50 plus chapters. But with each working, you add details and you reflect it, and I think improve the work, which was how I was able, within 1 year, to release 3 books. I also had a very able young assistant who first contacted me after I gave a speech to the Yale NUS students. He said, "You have many speeches scattered all over the place. Why don't we create a website so that people can access you readily?" So I asked Keat to help Taiho. And the 3 of us, like the little band which accompanied Tang Chang Chang to India, we became very close. At many points, they lifted my spirit, encouraged me to persist, made helpful comments, criticisms. Without them, I could not have completed this journey. And I want to record tonight my deep gratitude to them, to Zhao Hongkun. They fully deserve a round of applause. To Zhao Hongkun, and to a team in World Scientific, Lai An, Nicole, Jimmy Low, who went through the drafts, made corrections, and I must have been sometimes quite irritated because I made changes at the last moment. I was persistent in including pictures and so on. The pictures are many and rather unusual for such books. World Scientific thought that it was abnormal. But I said, look, it's part of a life story. It's like a fugue. It's a story in itself, the pictures. In parts, they perhaps illustrated the story. In parts, they were separate from the story. And instead of having high-resolution pictures on plates in the middle of the book, we scattered them throughout to make it easier for the reader, but at the expense of the quality of pictures. So my clinching argument to World Scientific was, it's a scrapbook of pictures. And I think in the end that worked well because it enabled me to include little things which reinforce the story, like my parents' wedding certificate in China in 1937, which I found when I went through their photographs. Perfect condition. An old menu card, where President Clinton, after he stepped down from office, wrote a little note to my 4 children, and many other little things. I also want to thank many of you and many others besides who went through different drafts, corrected them, made helpful comments. And sometimes, like my Tai Chi teacher, his comments were so engaging, I asked for his permission to include them as a separate box, so that between student and teacher, there's almost a dialogue, which I thought would help the reader understand what I was trying to convey. Gathering the old pictures turned out to be a huge effort. And without SPH and the National Archives, the work would have been much more difficult. I had to retrieve in the pre-cloud age pictures from old computers, which were nested in newer computers, which are nested in newer computers. And luckily, my son Eddie had made them more accessible for me. And staff from MFA, MTI, who helped me in a personal way by saying, no, you forgot this. Perhaps you should include this anecdote. Things which happened in Seattle, in Doha, which either I didn't know or had forgotten. So all these little things enriched the book, and there are so many people I had to thank, and probably many others whom I had neglected to mention. The book was written mostly from memory. I did not have separate research into the book, except for details of dates, spellings of names, places, sequence of events. Trawling my own memory was quite strenuous. It consumed a lot of nervous energy. But in the process, I helped to sort out my thoughts and organize them in neat packages. It's like an old study, you know. You finally, one day, decide to clean up, throw out the old stuff, and collect the books in different places. And you feel good about yourself that, oh, well, okay, you know, things are more organized now. I know where they are. And somehow, in writing the books, I've clarified in my own mind a lot of my thoughts and remembered the people I should thank. And many of them that I could remember, I mentioned in Musings, the people who touched my life and who helped me alter course. And many of you are here this evening, and I thank you for mentoring me. Not those who are my seniors, but even those who are my staff, who were very helpful. I mean, Heng Swee Keat, Deputy Prime Minister Heng Swee Keat, sorry. Common One, I did not know then, was already being earmarked to go into politics. So they had to send his replacement. Swee Keat, Deputy Prime Minister, was PPS to Lee Kuan Yew. So when he came to MTI, his reputation already preceded him. And he immediately became a big asset to me. And when Common One left, I felt completely at ease that I had how would you say it? An all singing, all dancing permanent secretary. I've, in my different ministerial appointments, dealt with many permanent secretaries, including General Tan Cheng Tiong and Mr. Lim Seong Guan, and my old boss, General Winston Chu, is here, many others. You have to adjust to superiors. You have to adjust to subordinates. And when my perm sec disagreed with me, I always checked myself that I could be wrong. I mean, I might persist, but I always knew that their views are important, and on many matters they would know much more than I did, and I better listen. So DPM Heng and I had a wonderful working relationship. But as I half expected, he was slotted for greater things. And Prime Minister called me to say, look, we did him in MES. Could I spare him? As if I could disagree. But luckily, I was soon off to MFA, where I had other permanent secretaries who were all wonderful people. Peter Ho, Bilahari, then had really Knights of Camelot, like Zhang Hengqi, Kishore, helping me. And I try to remember all of them and how they touched my life. It's easy to take credit, but in reality, you can never claim exclusive credit. Big things are done because many small things have been done by others. The Esplanade was my responsibility for a period of time. The idea for it was in earlier recommendations to the government. Ong Teng Cheong was a key man. When he became president, well, I had to take over, but he became the advisor. And on all important matters, I referred to him. But on matters that went wrong, I took responsibility because he was the president. When the design came out and there was a public outcry, and Lee Kuan Yew wrote me a love letter, which I recounted in the book, I had to defend it. But to Lee Kuan Yew's credit, when it was open, he was the one who said, for future such public projects, it should be carried out at the Esplanade, which from Lee Kuan Yew was a high compliment. There are two chapters on Lee Kuan Yew. The press gave inordinate attention to them, but the musings in Series 3 cover much more than that. Life is full of entanglements. I mean, we learn about quantum entanglement. I think in life, many things are entangled. My Tai Chi teacher, Pen Yao, told me a long time ago, he said, when you do your Tai Chi, think of the little circles in your body. When you loosen the little circles, the bigger circles loosen, and yet bigger ones loosen. And suddenly, like a golf stroke, executed because you're relaxed, a powerful swing. But many people are involved in those little circles. And no one should really say, I take credit for everything. In the end, the big forces are not within our control. Recognizing the big forces is critical because we may not be able to change many things, but we can change where we are. Our position in the flow, and whom we want to be in that flow. Many people we meet serendipitously, I mean, it's not as if we plan, but in life's journey, so many unexpected friendships which become so decisive. Musings have struck a resonant chord with many Singaporeans for whom Musings was written, including young Singaporeans. And it thrills me. Undergraduates coming to me with pages marked, parts highlighted, asking me for elaborations. I never expected that they would take such a deep interest in aspects of Singapore history or culture. But they do. And that says something, that these things do matter. Swee Keat talked about how I compared all of us as flotsam on the river of life, how we come together, how we separate, how our lives are entangled. One piece became rope to me, which is my wife. And we've gone through many ups and downs together. She can't remember many of the places we visited because her frequency range is different from mine. And I've come to appreciate that for many things, hers is a more sensitive sensor. And she's come to appreciate for other things, I may have a better sensor. But it's good that husband and wife can complement each other. And tonight, to thank all of you and to readers of Musings, she, on our behalf, will perform on the piano 2 short pieces from Chopin. It's not... She's somewhere at the back. I hope someone will call her to come forward to meet you. It's for everyone, but the pieces are also specifically dedicated to our parents, to Mark and to Mary, both of whom are here this evening, and to both of whom We owe a lot, especially to Grandma Mary, to the upbringing of our children. I hope someone is calling my wife. Because she wanted to calm herself down before a performance, so she asked to be excused from being in the receiving party for DPM and Huini. And thank you, Huini, for joining us. So happy that you could be here with us this evening, and for being a friend all these years.